In Ezra chapter 3, 50,000 faithful people have left their homes, where they were scattered across the kingdom of Persia, and have come back to the promised land, full of faith, but perhaps also full of fear for all that this change means for them. Shortly after their arrival, there is a significant date on the Jewish calendar. You might remember that there are 3 pilgrim festivals that were to be celebrated each year. These festivals require God's people to come and gather in Jerusalem together to rejoice and remember what God has done for them. Well, in the 7th month, it is the Festival of Tabernacles. This festival was first celebrated when God's people were released from the clutches of the Egyptian Empire and spent time wandering through the wilderness. And God said, once a year, I want you to gather together to make little booths or tabernacles for your family. And so everybody is sleeping in these temporary shelters or tents, like a national camping trip. And I want you to do this every year, God said. Even when you are in the promised land, in your homes, leave them for this week and remind yourselves of all that God brought you through as a people. Well, could there be a better festival for them to remember in this moment as they look back upon their long history and remember all that God has brought them through, as they remember that God is the one who has promised to give them not a temporary tabernacle, but an everlasting home. And they are living in the hope that they are starting to see the fulfillment of these promises all over again in their own lifetime. At the start of this chapter, there is no temple and there are no temple courts for them to meet in. There are just the ruins, the rubble of the previous one. And yet, they offer their sacrifices in obedience and thanksgiving to God. Some people take the perspective in life, one day I will worship God. One day I will come before him. One day I will submit my life to him, but I've got other priorities right now. These Israelites could well have said, look, observing this festival is a lovely idea and everything, but we've got bigger fish to fry. We've got homes to rebuild, routines to re-establish. We've got rubble to shift and walls to build. Our priority right now can't be the worship of God. Maybe one day we'll get round to it, but not today. Well, wonderfully, that is not their attitude. Without even so much as a temple court to come together within, they still sacrifice burnt offerings and worship the Lord. When the festival has concluded, the people rightly turn their attention to the rebuilding of the temple itself. You remember what a fanfare it was back in David's day, as the people gathered together and collected all the materials required for the construction of the temple, and how the construction itself resulted in the most glorious building the world had ever seen. Well, they've got a formidable task in front of them, haven't they, these ambitious Israelites? And they understand at least something of the gravity of the situation, just how serious it all is. As they lay the foundations for this new temple, they sing, they praise God, they recognize it's his goodness that has brought them this far, and his grace will lead them on. All the people sing together. He is good. His love towards Israel endures forever. And that is true, and they can testify to it. It's also the case, by the way, that those are the lyrics that were sung during the opening ceremony of Solomon's temple all those years ago. They are singing from the same hymn sheet as their forefathers, generations earlier. All the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But that's not the only reaction to these events. Verse 12 tells us that many of the older priests and the Levites and the family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they had seen the foundation of this temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. We might at first think that they are weeping due to a sense of overwhelming joy, but actually the rest of the Bible sheds light on this scene. Haggai was a prophet during this era. We'll get to his prophecy later in our studies, of course, but he, at this time, asks, who of you is left who saw this house in its former glory? See, he's addressing these older people in his prophecy. How does it look to you now? Does it not seem to you like nothing? And so it certainly seems that they are grieving here over the gap between what they remembered and what is the reality standing before them now, and they are discouraged by it. Haggai's instruction to them is to trust in the Lord, and that really is the perfect piece of advice. Do you ever look around at the church you are a part of, or Christianity in general in this generation, and think to yourself, Gosh, it all just seems so small, so unimpressive, really. And there is a sense in which that is true, actually. But we are not trusting in impressive people to come along and do impressive things. We are trusting in the living God who knows exactly what he is doing, and he will accomplish all that he has intended to do. And bear this in mind, he'll do it in his time, by his own methods, but he will do all that he has promised to do. Yeah, sometimes we are a bit disappointed by the little that seems to be accomplished. But the healthier and indeed happier perspective is to rejoice in what is being done and to trust the God who is doing it. He has brought us this far. He will lead us on. He is good, and his love endures forever.